This is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
What is good, everyone? Welcome into another episode of Ain't No Seats. We're here to break down a matchup between two teams that are coming off losses and two teams that kind of have quarterback questions right now. And in UCF, Central Florida is coming to Lawrence Saturday to play Kansas. And no better guest to get on than Brandon Helwig, who's covered UCF over on Rivals.com for well over 20 years now. Braiden, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And how are you feeling about this UCF team currently?
Thanks for having me on. It's been a blast. Just, obviously UCF's first year in the Big 12 and just, getting to know these different teams and these fan bases. I think I was on with your colleague, Cole Manbeck, a couple weeks ago for K-State. So that's just been a lot of fun from my perspective. You guys, how am I feeling about UCF? This is an interesting week. It's kind of a crossroads in a way for this season for UCF in the Big 12. 2 weeks ago, Big 12 opener at Kansas State. UCF was playing without starting quarterback John Rice Plumlee, who got hurt very late in the game in week 2 at Boise State, which was a comeback walk-off field goal win for UCF. So he hurt his knee, so he's been out the last few weeks. So UCF goes on the road to K-State. They're hanging in there. They take a lead in the third quarter. It was a one-possession game in the fourth quarter. The UCF's defense just really couldn't stop. They couldn't get off the field. K-State's running back Giddens, he ran for like 200 yards and 4 touchdowns, was the Doak Walker National Player of the Week. So, the moral of the story from that one is, UCF didn't win that game, but they hung in there. They showed that they can play on the same field. Obviously, UCF wasn't full strength. And we get to last week, and UCF, a big deal, first home game against Baylor in the Big 12. A lot of hype about that. And if you're UCF, you're just kind of looking, well, this is a game that, we should win. Baylor's, they struggled in the early part of this season. They had some issues at quarterback injuries, although Blake Shapen did come back for this one. And it looked like a blowout. I mean, it was 35-7, and it was 35-10 entering the fourth quarter. And, it's Florida, whether, there's been some stuff said about the fan base this week because a lot of the students and a lot of the other fans, they left in the fourth quarter when it was 35-10. They've been tailgating all day. They've been in the hot sun. They're like, I'm going to beat the traffic and go home. And nobody thought what was going to happen actually happened. Baylor scored 29 unanswered points. They were just everything that could have gone wrong for UCF went wrong. And somehow a game that they were leading 35-10 in the fourth quarter, they lost to Baylor. It's just one of those stunning games that you just couldn't believe it with your own eyes. So how am I feeling about UCF? I really don't know right now. This is an important game for UCF to kind of, get back on track and to maybe, have some juice going into the Big 12 schedule. But if you lose this one, you have a bye week, and then you're on the road to Oklahoma. And that's not going to be easy. I mean, you could be looking at an 0-4 start if you can't find a way to win at Kansas. So this is a really big week for UCF.
Yeah, that Baylor game's wild. I was down in Austin for the KU-Texas game, and I saw the score 35-7. And one of the guys that's on this podcast texted me and said, holy cuss word, UCF. And I was like, what? And I kind of watched the highlights last night. And when they kicked the field goal 35-10, it's like the announcers, there's no enthusiasm. The stadium's dead. I feel like no one's worried about it at all. And then, a bunch of crazy stuff starts happening. Scoop and score. It was obviously just wild. But like you said, the K-State game, they took the lead. It was tied at 24. They had a 3rd and 6. They got a stop. They got a roughing the passer call.
Yeah.
The K-State game, that score is it's much different. It's a much different game than the score shows. And then the Baylor game, they obviously should have won. You talked about the bye week coming up, and that had me wondering about John Rice Plumlee. Obviously, you can kind of look at it two different ways. You probably maybe need to win this game to go bowling, or at least give yourself a great chance. So maybe you rush him back, or do you rest him and then give him 2 full weeks to get 100%?
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna find out, I guess. When it comes to game day, because UCF never really came out and, specifically said what his injury was, but we're pretty sure he's dealing with a ligament strain in his knee, which is a similar injury to what Blake Shapen at Baylor had been dealing with. And just depending on the severity and it can kind of vary in terms of, when you can come back. And, I don't know if he'll be 100%, but we were told after the game on Saturday by Gus Malzahn that he had actually just been cleared the day before this past Friday, but he hadn't gone through practice. So I don't know what cleared really means exactly. Cleared probably doesn't mean he's 100%. Cleared just means he can start to do so. So we're not really sure where he's going to be. He's been practicing this week. I don't think we're going to be told whether he's playing or starting or not playing. It'll be something that I'm fairly positive that Gus Malzahn keeps close to the vest. And we may not know until warm-ups on Saturday whether he's going to give it a go. But I have a feeling that he is going to do everything in his power to get back out there. He is a senior. This football team and this season is very important to him. This is his final season of eligibility. Obviously John Rice and everyone part of this team feels like they were kind of kind of overlooked a little bit in the Big 12 going into this season, because I know UCF sort of feels, at least when you talk about these 4 newcomer schools, they kind of felt they're in the best position to make some noise, to be kind of a sleeper team in this Big 12. And it's just been killing John Rice that he hasn't been out there. So, we'll see if his knee holds up. Now, you're right. There is a bye week. And, if he doesn't play, he'd have that much longer to get ready for the Oklahoma game. Another thing I'm kind of wondering about, Kansas plays on turf, on field turf. And so, that can be a little spongy. I'm not sure how Kansas turf is particularly, specifically if there's some weird quirks about it. But, when you're dealing with a knee injury and stuff, Oklahoma plays on grass. I don't know if that plays into the decision or not, but we'll find out. Now, UCF, if he doesn't go, Timmy McClain has been the backup, and he started the last few games. UCF has, done okay offensively, I want to say, but this Baylor game, you can point to a lot of different reasons why UCF lost. There were drives that stalled. There were turnovers. One of them was a critical, you talked about a scoop and score. That had anything to do with Timmy McClain, but there was an interception he threw in the red zone that if UCF scores or he doesn't turn it over, they kick a field goal, they probably still win the game. So he made some mistakes there. There was bad miscues on special teams. Defense couldn't stop Baylor in the fourth quarter. But Timmy McClain, he's not John Rice Plumlee. He's done an admirable job given the circumstances. But I think UCF would love to have John Rice for this game, because like I said, this is a big game. If UCF wants to make a bowl game and try to make some noise in their first Big 12 year, this is kind of like a must win.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Timmy McClain, because I'm a diehard KU fan, so I'm all over the message boards looking at what people are saying, and people are kind of saying that UCF hasn't really skipped a beat without John Rice Plumlee, just from an offensive standpoint, explosiveness. And I feel like people kind of forget John Rice Plumlee just from a rushing standpoint, how dynamic he is. I mean, it's a guy that rushed for over 800 yards last year. He was a quarterback in the SEC. So I guess just talk about, and we're not here to disrespect Timmy McClain. I think he's been solid. He had a great game against Nova. He was, like you said, he was in the game against Kansas State. That was a tight game. Just tell us how big of a difference this offense can go by being led from John Rice Plumlee to Timmy McClain. Yeah,
and that's still kind of an unknown question, because think about John Rice Plumlee. He's played college football for a while. I think his first year at Ole Miss, I think it was in 2019. So he's an experienced player in some respects because of his age, but he's not as experienced as he started quarterback. Before he transferred to UCF at Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin came in, Matt Corral was their starting quarterback. John Rice Plumlee had moved to wide receiver. So when he transferred to UCF prior to the 2022 season to play quarterback, he had never really been a full-time starting quarterback. Now, he did play quarterback a little bit as a true freshman at Ole Miss. He had been a backup and a reserve. But last year was really his first full season being a starter. So he's learning and adjusting on the fly. He's reading defense. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that he really hadn't done before. He was doing just for the first time last year. And so there were some parts of his game he knew he had to improve at. Obviously, you mentioned he's a running threat. So that's always one of those things with those types of quarterbacks. Like, are they going to scan the field? Are they going to, be patient in the pocket and find the open guy? Or is he just going to take off and start running? And so that's kind of that fine line with him. Yeah, he could take off and make a play and start running, but, maybe his awareness and pocket presence has to improve. So there were a lot of, you see, brought in a new offensive coordinator, brought in a new quarterback coach that was working with them. So we only saw John Rice so far. We saw him against Kent State in the season opener, and they were heavily outmatched. I mean, UCF killed those guys. And then Boise. And the Boise game was one of those games that was close. It shouldn't have been. And that had nothing to do with John Rice Plumlee. Like I said, there were some crazy plays against Baylor that enabled them to come back. There were some crazy plays in the Boise game that kept Boise in it. There were 2 times that UCF was going to score a touchdown, and they threw it to their top 2 receivers and guys who typically catch the ball. And for some reason, the ball comes to them, it hits them in the hands, it hits them in the chest, whatever. They don't catch it. The ball goes up. They deflect the ball up in the air, and the Boise State defender was in the exact spot he needed to be to pick off the pass. So you go from 2 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, and you scored no points. So that game shouldn't have really been a game. But we haven't seen, I'm kind of anxious to see what a healthy John Rice Plumlee looks against the real defense. We haven't seen him against the real Big 12 level defense, but if he's able to, the thing that I think he's going to do, he's going to bring to the table that maybe Timmy McClain is still kind of learning is I think he's going to make smarter decisions. There were some times that Timmy McClain, throwing the ball clearly where he shouldn't. He was in Kansas State. I know you brought up some issues in that game, but he's running backwards. He's taking sacks. There's just some of these awareness issues that he kind of struggles with. At the same time, Timmy McClain is probably the better deep ball thrower compared to Plumlee, and he's had some plays. I think the pass that UCF had to take the lead against K-State in the second half, that was a fantastic throw. There's some throws that he can make. I'm not sure John Rice can. So I'll be interested. Obviously, we're anxious to see who plays on Saturday, but I know for UCF's chances to kind of compete in this first Big 12 season, they're really hoping to get back, John Rice Plumlee sooner than later.
Yeah. So you brought up those receivers, and I want to get into them. But before we do that, I wanted to talk about one of our sponsors, Home Field Apparel. We love them so much. They take care of us. Any school that you like, they're going to have elite stuff because their designs are great. Their stuff's really comfortable. Everything we get from them, we love because it's comfortable. Like I said, the designs are great. The website is Home Field Apparel, and you can get 15% off. No Seats 23 is the code right now. We really appreciate Home Field. Like, we talk about it all the time, how well they take care of us and how elite their designs are. And just any school they put out there is great, and we love them. So go check them out, homefieldapparel.com, No Seats 23 at checkout. Let's take a break.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
So you brought up the receivers against Boise State. Obviously, that game was at Boise. They got Kobe Hudson, guy that has 21 catches, 468 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Big-time recruit, especially according to your site, Rivals.com. Him and Javon Baker, who we'll talk about, were both top 120 national recruits coming out. Kobe Hudson obviously committed to Auburn. Javon Baker committed to Bama. Those are 2 dudes that actually played receiver at those schools. Those schools are pretty good at football, and they have some pretty good depth. So just getting playing time at those schools is crazy. But Kobe Hudson, he's had 3 big-time games this year, 3 games over 100 yards receiving. Seems to be at least Timmy McClain's favorite target. He had 9 targets against Nova, 6 targets against Boise, and he seems to come down with every single target. Can you talk about Kobe Hudson and how much he's progressed this year?
Yeah, you mentioned, Kobe Hudson and Javon Baker, just where they came from, and that's, Gus Malzahn obviously had been at Auburn. He recruited Kobe Hudson to Auburn, and I think he led them. I think Kobe might have been their leading receiver in 2020, and, new coaching staff comes in, didn't see eye to eye. Gus comes to UCF, and so Kobe kind of followed him here. Last year was his first year at UCF. Maybe, he was definitely, one of UCF's top 2 or 3 receivers, but I think Kobe didn't really have the kind of year that he envisioned. But, as you mentioned, he's off to a fantastic start this year. He had a trio, I think 3 consecutive games with more than 100 receiving yards. Now, last week against Baylor, for some reason, he just didn't get the ball. He just wasn't involved in the passing game at all, whether it was flow of the game. Was he open, not open? I don't know. I think he only had 1 catch last week, but he had been clearly Timmy McClain's favorite target in the previous 3 games. So he's been a he's more of that deep threat. And I think that's one reason, obviously, why his yards or why he was, had such a commanding lead in receiving yardage. That I mentioned Timmy McClain has a propensity to like to throw the deep ball, and he's very accurate with it. And Kobe is usually the recipient when it comes to those deep balls. But yeah, he's a guy that, we've heard has, maybe was a little bit immature and, some stuff when he came in, but now that he's older, more experienced, he's putting in the work. he's working to improve himself as a blocking receiver. And so that's a guy, those guys are going to have to, if UCF wants to beat Kansas, they're going to have to show up.
Yeah. And I wanted to give the listener kind of a recap of what this kid is capable of. He had 5 catches for 134 yards at Boise, 6 catches for 147 yards versus Villanova, and then 5 catches, 138 yards, 2 touchdowns at K-State. Like Brandon said, he had a big year at Auburn, close to 600 yards receiving. And then Javon Baker, let's touch on him just really quickly. Last year, 56 catches, 796 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. Played at Bama, committed there out of high school. This year, he's got 17 catches for 332 yards and 2 touchdowns, including a 65-yard TD on Saturday against Baylor. Can you kind of touch on him a little bit?
Yeah, Baker, if you would have asked me before the season, and it's kind of always been, Javon Baker, Kobe Hudson, kind of 1A and 1B but I probably would, if you would ask me to pick one or the other who I think was going to have the bigger season statistically, I probably would have guessed Javon Baker. He had a better season last year than I think Kobe did. He's usually, sure-handed. I think one of the players said one time, they call him 50-50 balls. Well, when you throw it to Javon, it's more like a 75-25 ball. 75% chance he's going to bring it down. He's got a little bit of a slower start this year. I don't know if it's just, change of quarterback, because I think he was maybe more of a John Rice target than seems like maybe Kobe Hudson's been more of a Timmy McClain target. But both those guys are clearly lead the receiving core. And another guy that I got to bring up, I don't know if maybe you're about to, is Xavier Townsend. He's a sophomore, and I think he's UCF's 3rd receiver right now in terms of stats. And those are really the main guys. I was looking at Kansas. It seems like they spread the ball out maybe a little bit more, but with UCF, it's those 3 guys get the vast majority of balls thrown their way.
Yeah, I guess with Kansas, for UCF fans listening, it's Lawrence Arnold, Luke Grimm, Quentin Skinner, Mason Fairchild, who our fans had high hopes for this year, and he's still a good player. Expected him to be involved a little more this year. So him, obviously those 3 receivers, and then you have a great 1-2 punch in the backfield. And obviously we have our own QB questions right now that we can get into later, but I wanted to talk about the backfield a little bit. Obviously, R.J. Harvey's getting a bulk of the carries, and then Johnny Richardson, who has 28 less carries than R.J. Harvey, but more rushing yards. He's averaging 8.8 a pop. I think both can break one at any time. So can you kind of touch on that 1-2 punch in the back?
Yeah. R.J. Harvey is, used to have last year had Isaiah Bowser. He was kind of a big, kind of bruising running back, was kind of their top guy. He graduated. And so R.J. Harvey had a huge year last year. What's kind of remarkable about R.J. is that he's a former high school quarterback, and he's also had come off, a bad knee injury. He tore his ACL, before that 2021 season. So he missed all that year and then came back last year. And some people said, he was running faster maybe with a brace on in spring than he was, before he got hurt. So he's kind of that blend of, bigger guy, speed and, size and power. So he's been UCF's number 1 option in terms of running back, and they'll use him in the Wildcat quite a bit, actually. Some fans think they're using a bit too much, because 2 times they used them in the Wildcat resulted in 2 turnovers. One of them was a crucial at Kansas State. I think he had already run for a first down. He was kind of trying to pop through a pile or whatever, and the ball comes out. And then the one that's really glaring, that really just changed the game completely against Baylor, is that he was lining up as a Wildcat quarterback. They stopped the ball. He took his eye off the ball when it's coming to him, and he totally mishandled the snap. So the ball is on the ground. It kind of squirts out, even further away. Before you know it, Baylor guy's picking it up and is running it back for a touchdown. And if there's one play you had to point at last week, that's the reason Baylor won. That's probably it. So A lot of fans are wondering this week, like, what's up with this? That's a Gus Malzahn thing. He was innovative offensively in a lot of ways. If you're not totally familiar with his background, he came up through the high school ranks in Springdale, Arkansas. He wrote a book about the tempo, no huddle offense, hurry up offense. And he also was big when he was an assistant coach at Arkansas and kind of bringing the Wildcat, kind of, making it popular to run. Like I think he had Darren McFadden and some other guys in Arkansas, and they did that a lot. I think it might have been 06, 07 time frame. So that's kind of been something that's been linked, to Gus Malzahn through the years. And I think he just is a big fan of running stuff out of that. But Johnny Richardson, you mentioned, a lot of fans are wondering, why isn't he getting more touches? He's got a lot less carries, but he's got more yards. I think last week is one of those things, talking about Baylor, but the very first play from scrimmage for UCF on offense, he runs it back for a 79-yard touchdown. I'm at the other end of the end zone. All of a sudden, he's just coming down. There's no one around him. I mean, he just outruns everybody. I mean, he has that home run threat speed. I mean, he's a smaller back. He's not as big and physical as an RJ Harvey, but if he gets a crease, if he gets a hole, he's gone. And so he's had a lot of explosive plays in this Big 12 play for UCF. So a lot of fans are kind of wondering, why are we seeing more of Johnny Richardson? Who knows? Maybe we will on Saturday. But you mentioned, those are definitely the top two guys for UCF at running back.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about RJ Harvey getting the bulk of the carries, and Johnny Richardson has 2 100-plus yard games without getting a ton of touches. So super impressive, getting 8.8 a pop right now. Talked about Gus Malzahn, and I listened to a lot of stuff he said the other day, and just talked about John Rice Plumlee obviously practicing this week. But one thing that really stuck out was, and I didn't know much about this because, like I said, I didn't watch the Baylor game. I feel bad for UCF fans that they keep having to hear about this game, but
it's okay.
He talked about how banged up they are. They lost their starting center due to an injury late in the third quarter. But outside of him, I don't know a ton about the injury situation outside of John Rice Plumlee, obviously. Can you kind of talk about how banged up they truly are and what key guys they could be?
Yeah, I mean, I just think at this stage, it's kind of just football season banged up. I mean, it's not, other than John Rice, who's been, completely out with a knee injury, it's just, they're starting out, center's been a position that's, obviously UCF was breaking in a new center. They thought it was going to be a guy named Drake Metcalf. He was a transfer from Stanford. He starts the season and he has issues. He's a couple of times he false start. There was one time he snapped the ball and he shouldn't have. So they got really frustrated with him. And it's interesting because they yanked him out really quickly after, I think it was the third game. So he's been yanked out and hasn't played since. And so they put in, and the guy who probably would have been backup center, I think he was kind of banged up for a game or two. So they put in, the guy who we thought was the third string, who was a redshirt freshman. So he had been starting at center, has done a pretty good job. At some point in the Baylor game, I think he, maybe sprained his ankle. I mean, I'm not sure. He just had his ankle on ice. So then they put in this other guy. It's just kind of stuff like that. Now, the biggest one that I think has not been 100% is probably UCF's best defensive lineman is Ricky Barber, defensive tackle, the most experienced guy on that side of the ball. He has played against K-State and Baylor, but very limited reps. We're not, they haven't said exactly what his issue is. I think it's an ankle or something, but he played limited snaps against K-State, limited against Baylor. They only played like maybe 10 plays of the whole game, just kind of pulled himself out because he wasn't feeling good out there. So that's been the biggest one that's been hobbled. We'll see if he's any better this week. It'll benefit all those guys that have a bye week after this one and get ready for the rest of the conference season. But there have just been some guys who have just been kind of, there was one of UCF safeties, Quadric Bullard, kind of went out late in the game and just kind of football stuff right now. But as far as we know, nothing major made. There's a tight end that had been out, but then he came back this last game. But other than John Rice, that's been the biggest one to note so far.
Okay, yeah, I've been wondering about the defense. I truly don't know a ton about UCF's defense. I know this isn't too crazy, but they've given up 3 100-plus yard rushers this year. You talked about DJ Giddens in the big game he had, carrying it and catching it out of the backfield. And then Richard Reese had 100 on the dot last week, and then they gave up, forget the Boise State running back's name. Genty, yeah. He had 24 for 115. So just don't know a ton about this UCF defense.
I don't know if I know a ton about the UCF defense, to be honest, because, it's just part of, when you get to a season, it's all about level of competition, and it's really hard. You can't look at stats. I mean, you do, but you don't. UCF starts off with Kent State and, Boise State. Although, yeah, he did run for a lot. Other than that, the defense looked really good against Boise. But then again, this isn't the Boise of a few years ago. Boise's kind of taken a step down, honestly, the last few years. And then we get to, Villanova, and, that's, they were holding, I forgot what the stat was. I think they held Villanova to like 8 passing yards in the first half or something. I mean, you can't even look at that kind of game. And so I think, UCF has a new defensive coordinator this year, Addison Williams. He's been on staff, though, with Gus the last couple of years as secondary coach, got the promotion to DC. they have guys returning. They brought in a bunch of transfers, but it turns out the transfers really aren't contributing as much as people probably would have predicted when they recruited them. So it's still mostly the same guys. Linebacker is a major weakness. Defensive line is considered the strength, although I said, Ricky Barber, one of their better guys, has kind of been banged up the last couple of weeks. Secondary has a lot of guys. They're still trying to kind of find their way. I think that play's been okay, but it's just these past couple of, you mentioned K-State, 200 plus yards for Giddens. I think he was a Doak Walker national running back of the week or whatever. So that wasn't a great performance. Just could not get off the field. I mean, they just could not. And it wasn't like Kansas State had big chunk plays it was just methodically. Yeah, I think I saw one of their guys tweet something that said he couldn't even, going through, the individual box scores through the years. I think some of this stuff may only go back, since the late 90s, early 2000s. I think K-State might have broken like a first down record, I think, against UCF. And then Baylor. The thing that was weird about the Baylor game is that while UCF got to a big lead and it looked like it was a dominating score, but I'm not sure it was a dominating performance because a lot of the scores for UCF were just quick. There was, like I said, that first play from scrimmage was a touchdown. There was another bomb for a touchdown. There was a fumble that UCF forced, and they returned that for a touchdown. So that was 3 of the scores. It wasn't like UCF just kind of dominated they scored. That was basically it. They just scored really quickly. And so the defense was on the field a lot. Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but I know the time of possession discrepancy in the first half especially was really slanted towards Baylor, even though UCF had the huge lead. So by the time we got to the second half in the fourth quarter, a defense that was already questionable was really gassed. And so I think that also played a big factor in why Baylor was able to come back. So yeah, like I said, I don't know a whole lot myself. It's a big question to see, whether, Jalen Daniels, that's kind of a big deal, I think, for UCF. I mean, not obviously KU has a experienced backup if Bean goes again, but I think UCF would like to get the benefit of maybe not playing the preseason offensive player of the year, because I think every week it's been a question at quarterback. There was Will Howard at KC. They didn't think he was going to play against UCF, and he did, and he had a great game. And Blake Shapen came back for Baylor when he had been out for the last few weeks, and after a rocky start, he had a pretty good game. So I think UCF is hoping maybe Jalen Daniels back kind of stays stiff for another week.
Yeah, I think there's so many question marks with this UCF team. Like, you obviously cover the team and you're not sure on some of the things or if they're good yet or what. I think they're just a sneakily good football team. And I think Vegas kind of agrees. Obviously, they have the spread at KU -2, a team that made a bowl game last year. I'm not saying they're amazing. They started 4-0. They were just ranked. But UCF with QB questions and a little banged up, as Malzahn says, is only a 2-point dog on Saturday. And I mean, Blake Shapen and Will Howard too, that guys that have been around, they've pretty damn good quarterbacks. So I don't really know how to judge this team. And we talked about it. The 2 losses were Kansas State, which they gave up a legendary performance to Giddens, who had 4 touchdowns. We know he had 200 rushing yards. He had like 80 plus receiving too. And then Baylor 35-7 and then 35-10 with like 17 minutes left. So the K-State loss, I guess it looks decently bad from a scoreboard perspective, but they were right in that game. You take that roughing the passer call away, or I don't know, you slow down Giddens from having the best running back performance ever, and then you finish against Baylor. You don't turn it over a couple times in their territory, they'd be fine. But I think UCF's sneakily a good team. They might have some question marks, but Vegas agrees with me, I think. And I think KU fan, I really think this could be a toss-up on Saturday. Let's take a quick break, but let's finish talking UCF after the break.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
They also have a vet, I guess maybe not a vet QB, but he had a good year last year. They have a proven head coach. So I think UCF's a solid squad. And like you said, they might be desperate at this point. They might rush back Plumlee, but they have to win, like you said. And I purposely waited to bring this game up. If you guys want to get mad, blame Brandon for bringing it up early. He kind of had to, but obviously Baylor 35-7 lead on Saturday. They kicked a field goal to make it a 4-score game still, which I thought was kind of weird. But let's talk about the team. After that game, you obviously cover the team. You're around it. Do you think this is a situation where they rise up? John Rice Plumlee gets them fired up if he plays, or is this a loss that could kind of demoralize the team?
It could go either way. I mean, you kind of illustrated the directions it could go. I mean, this is a crossroads. I mean, this is a really important moment for the season for UCF because I think their schedule is kind of top heavy. You know, it starts out top heavy in terms of the Big 12 schedule, and they also, you know, they have the, you know, breakdown of having to go on the road 5 times in the Big 12. And if they don't win this one, it's going to be a tough road to hoe with, you know, OU after the bye week just to become bowl eligible. But yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, we had, you know, press availability on Monday, and, you know, they just kind of bring out, you know, this, you know, kind of the 2 older players that, you know, they're just kind of give you player speak. We call it coach speak, and it's also player speak, and they talk, oh, we put it behind us and all this stuff. I don't know if I buy that sometimes. I mean, of all the games, all the UCF, I've seen some absolutely stunning UCF games, and there's the games that UCF won. There was kind of a similar game in terms of a huge deficit. You know, 10 years ago, UCF went on the road to Louisville. That's when they had Charlie Strong and Teddy Bridgewater, and I think they were like 6th or 7th in the country. And UCF kind of got down like a Baylor did and just had this miraculous comeback, you know, won on one of the last plays of the game, and it kind of was a real stunning moment, you know, for positive for UCF. And this is kind of the opposite. So they could go either direction. This is an important week for Gus Malzahn to kind of, you know, keep everyone believing. And I can tell you what, if John Rice is, you know, we've talked about him as a quarterback, but he's got tremendous charisma. He is like the leader of the team. So he's a guy that's going to give a great speech. He's going to get, you know, he's going to have people ready to, you know, run through a brick wall to play for him. So I think if he's back, you know, whether it may, you know, you kind of overemphasize or overhype aspects like that, I don't know if it really makes a difference, but I think guys are really going to I think it's going to give them a lot of, you know, needed extra juice if they know John Rice Plumlee is back and playing this week.
Yeah, so there's question marks on the UCF defense, but I think maybe they're good questions. Just you don't know if they're good or not yet. I mean, we're still really early into the season. KU's offense is obviously pretty dynamic, except in Austin last week, but Andy Goldenicki's a great play caller. Jalen Daniels, no idea if he's going to play. KU keeps things pretty close to vest, but our backfield's really good. 2 studs and Devin Neal, Daniel Highshaw. So what problems do you think this KU offense could create for UCF's defense?
Yeah, kind of, you know, what we've sort of on the same vein, what we've been talking about, you know, UCF stopping the run. I mean, they haven't really done a great job of that, to put it mildly. And yeah, that's something I'm sure that KU is going to try to exploit on Saturday. And sometimes these passes through the middle, these slants, these linebackers, it's not a great position for UCF right now. I feel like they have one player, Jason Johnson, who's okay, who's all right, maybe a little bit above average. Some of the other linebackers, they've been struggling at that spot. So they've kind of been hurt, you know, with plays in the middle of the field, tight ends and what have you, and, you know, stopping running backs, you know, from having 200-yard games. So that's been an issue, and that's what I think, you know, if Kansas will probably try to exploit against UCF's defense. Like I said, we're still kind of wondering what defense is going to show up. Is this just a mediocre defense? Do they have the ability? Are they going to be a little bit better than that, or is this just a bad defense? Like we'll know a lot more these next couple weeks.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to touch on the quarterback situation for UCF one more time, and I just maybe from your standpoint or from a fan standpoint, is it really that much of a difference between John Rice Plumlee and Timmy McClain, or does the staff and the fans feel pretty comfortable no matter who's behind center?
You know, if you would have asked me this before Baylor, I would have said they would be pretty comfortable. I just think that now that we've had back there, like I said, Timmy's done some good things, and he can throw the deep ball. He can make some wow plays, but then he does plays where you're just like scratching your head, like, what are you doing? Like, why'd you do that? Like, why'd you run backwards 12 yards and take a sack when you could have thrown it away? And then when he tries to throw it away, why did you throw it right to where there were a bunch of defenders and there's no receiver? So I think fans are kind of getting a little antsy or a little, you know, I think people were, you know how it is when you have a backup quarterback. Everyone always is excited. They want to see how they play. I think for a lot of UCF people, this was going to be John Rice Plumlee's final year. So people want to see the backup. Like, is Timmy McClain, is he a guy that could be the quarterback of the future? Does he have a chance to earn the job, next year when it's a wide open competition? So a lot of people were excited to see him play. He's a name in Central Florida in the area. He played for one of the best high schools, Sanford Seminole. He won 40-plus games through his high school career, won a state championship. He initially played at South Florida, UCF's rival, Warren I-4. Maybe you guys are somewhat familiar with it. It's been, I know you guys have Kansas State and Missouri kind of rivals. It's been for UCF, it's been South Florida. So he started there a couple years ago. They brought in a transfer from Baylor, kind of demoted him prior to last season. So he transferred to UCF last year and had to sit out. So, a lot of people know who he is. They're familiar with him from high school. Actually, he almost beat UCF a couple years ago in the bounce house when he was the quarterback at South Florida. Almost came down the field and almost beat UCF in their final drive 2 years ago. But, if you would ask UCF fans now, I mean, I think people know. I think there's, what you're going to get more with John Rice Plumlee than you do with Timmy McClain. And if John Rice has made the improvement like everyone said that he did going into this season, yeah, I think everyone's just ready for John Rice to come back, and hopefully, it's this week.
Yeah, obviously, you talked about Timmy McClain and his decision-making and some of the things he can make happen, though. That Baylor game, obviously, where he ran to the back of the end zone almost.
Oh, yeah, that was crazy. I mean, that would have been like the coolest thing to hype if UCF would have actually won the game. I mean, that would have been an amazing play. It gave UCF a chance, I guess, and there were some plays there, like, you ran it, I think you had no more timeouts, and there was, I think he threw a short pass to a guy that wasn't even close to getting out of bounds. Like, they should have thrown that. Like, You're trying to preserve. And so with that, when that play happened, they had no choice but then I think kick a 59-yard field goal, which was going to be tough. But I think there was maybe a better chance you could possibly do that than the Hail Mary. So, there were some decisions. There were some questionable decisions at times from him.
Yeah, and Eric Collins was on the call at TV. We're huge fans of him on this podcast, and I thought he was going to have a stroke when Timmy McClain did that. If you get the chance to go,
that was a great call. I was like, that was amazing. That was a lot of excitement and emotion. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's the Hornets announcer. I don't know. I'm sure you know that, but he lost his mind. But yeah, Timmy McClain, he's capable of doing stuff like that. If you want to go watch that replay, I'm sure UCF fans, you don't really want to, but KU fans, if you want to see what he's capable of. But I wanted to quickly touch on him as a runner because he's obviously athletic. And John Rice Plumlee, he rushed for over 800 yards last year. I talked about that. And with Malzahn, I feel like you always think of a running quarterback. I remember Nick Marshall at Auburn and Plumlee last year.
Newton when Gus was OC back then, won the national championship with him. Yeah,
when Chizik was at So I guess McClain is a runner. He hasn't been great so far. I don't really know his stats.
I don't know if I'd call him. I mean, most quarterbacks these days can run. I think he's one of those quarterbacks that can run, but it's not a prominent part of his skill set. He's more of a guy that's going to look to make a play first, throwing the ball, than he will running the ball. He can't. I think Plumlee, it's one of those things that it's right up. That's probably what he does best. Is his elusiveness, his whether it's a design play or just making something happen when something breaks down. I mean, he is a runner. He is a fantastic athlete. I think with Timmy, it's more of just something he can do, and it's just I think he's a guy that's more of a pass first, and will look down the field to make a play. As you saw, he can elude. He could sort of. I think the offensive coordinator for UCF, I think he used the word freelance. He kind of will be freelancing at times and backyard football kind of crazy stuff, but then he'll find a way to make a play, and that's kind of what you were describing with that one highlight.
Yeah, so let's talk about UCF, their football program, like as a big picture. So I'm trying to research these new Big 12 teams as much as I can. We played BYU a few weeks ago, and that was interesting to learn more about them and their fans. Showed out in Lawrence, but I want to talk about the big picture with UCF, and I've seen a lot of people say that UCF, their fans, their staff, they truly believe that they can be one of the top tier programs in this league. I think it'd be pretty, appealing to recruit to that campus. So can you just talk about UCF looking down the road, and do you truly believe that statement that they could be one of the better teams in the league?
Yeah, I mean, for UCF, this is it's kind of an amazing story. Just the journey is going to be it's the youngest university in Power 5, founded in 1963. Didn't play football until 1979, but then it was Division III, Division II, 1AA. They weren't part of FBS until 1996. And then it was just kind of, rising up through that level. It was an independent with Dante Culpepper in the late 90s. He was ended up being a first-round draft pick, had a nice, little career with Minnesota Vikings. And then they joined I don't know if how many people nationally remember this. UCF was in the Mid-American Conference as a football-only member. Schools from Ohio and Michigan, played in the MAC in the early 2000s and, Conference USA, the American, and obviously now to the Big 12. So they've kind of, steadily built the program. The fan base has grown right along with it. UCF is a huge school, a huge enrollment. I think it's the largest in the country now. The one thing that I think that kind of set the trajectory in motion was opening an on-campus stadium in 2007. That just really galvanized the community, the alumni, the student body. UCF hadn't been playing at the Citrus Bowl, which is kind of an old decrepit stadium downtown. It's kind of hard to build. When you don't have a campus stadium, that's just such a tough thing. And so that kind of set the wheels in motion. There was that 2013 season that UCF ended up, I think, ranked number 10, beat Baylor in the Fiesta Bowl. That was a huge moment. There was the undefeated streak, 17 and 18. Scott Frost in 2017. UCF, see behind me,
national champs.
They were national champions. Mackenzie Milton, quarterback. So there's been a lot of great moments here that I kind of think got UCF into the Big 12, but. Looking forward, from a recruiting standpoint, you're in Florida. You're, arguably the best recruiting state in the nation. And, Gus Malzahn is a great recruiter. And I think right now, UCF had the top rated class in the Big 12, maybe Texas. It's all on paper right now anyway. Nobody's signed, but UCF is on track to sign one of the top classes in this new Big 12, and they're recruiting players, and they're getting, more 4-star players than they ever have. Obviously, Big 12 is a big reason for that. But yeah, with the way they're recruiting, it's easy to see that, once Texas and OU leave, I know the teams are coming in from the Pac next year, but there's really no reason not to think that UCF will be a factor in this league going forward.
Yeah, we have this conversation all the time because on this podcast, because obviously Texas and OU are leaving after the season, just trying to think of who can be the top tier programs in the league. And we get our hopes up that it could be KU. If Lance Leipold sticks around, I think they have a chance. K-State's going to be pretty good for a while as long as Kleiman stays there. And then UCF just feels like a no-brainer because the recruiting, their coach, I think they could be absolutely one of the best teams in the league. I wanted to talk about one more thing about UCF's team that I think KU fans should know about. And it's been the issue of turning the ball over on offense. And that's been a huge emphasis from Gus Malzahn, something that obviously every team needs to fix if they're turning it over. But talk about how big of an issue that's been. Plumlee, even himself, has had more picks than touchdown passes this year. So talk about how big of an issue turning it over has been for this offense.
It's everything, right? I think offensive coordinator Darren Henshaw says the number one objective offensively, it's not scoring touchdowns, it's not doing this or that. It's ending every drive with a kick. Okay, whether it's a punt or a field goal or whatever, like that's at minimum. You don't want to end the drive the other way with the turnover. And I think we've kind of talked about it already. And there was like 2 crushing turnovers against Baylor. You could talk about it, you could practice it, but it's we'll see what happens on Saturday. But that's obviously been a huge factor. There was opportunities in that Kansas State game. If they don't fumble the ball there, they don't throw the interception there. If they were able to actually score on those drives, it's a completely different game. If UCF doesn't turn the ball over, and they, both times they turned the ball over against Baylor, they were getting in the red zone or in the red zone, and then they probably at minimum would have kicked a field goal. They would have won that game. So you can almost point to turnovers. It definitely cost them one game for sure against Baylor, and could have. Don't get me wrong. I feel like Kansas State was the better team. I think that showed on the field, but. You never know what can happen in the game. If they hadn't turned the ball over, they would have been in much better position to make a game of it and possibly win.
Yeah, for sure. That's why I think the 3-2 record and the 0-2 record in the Big 12 are pretty misleading, and there's just no reason in the world they should have lost the Baylor game. Even you said no turnovers, but one of the turnovers was literally just gifting them 7 points, score. So yeah,
no time off the clock at all. I mean, even if you fall on the ball, even if it's a turnover, but you tackle the guy and you make him drive down the field, you probably still win the game. I mean, they scored in no time at all.
And then K-State, DJ Giddens had 30-plus rushes, 200 yards. That's a lot of time off the clock. And they still had a chance to win that game. And I think you take the roughing the passer call away, who knows what happens. But, yeah, I think you're going to get – KU fans, you're going to get a really, I guess, hungry and desperate UCF team on Saturday, a game that they probably need to win. And UCF fans, I still feel okay about you guys going bowling, even if you don't beat KU Saturday. Obviously, you guys know your schedule. But – the last 5 games of the year, West Virginia at home, at Cincy, Oklahoma State at home, who has been pretty stinky, at Texas Tech, and then Houston at home. So that's 5 winnable games. You beat KU, you're in a hell of a situation to make it to a bowl game. I think the percentages would be very high, but yeah, I think this UCF team is really underrated. I think it'll be a really good game Saturday, and you've talked about both sides of the ball. We talked about KU a little bit. What's your final prediction for Saturday?
Well, I one thing that's kind of, it seems like the last, we talked about, UCF's first 2 Big 12 games, they were kind of facing teams who, in some respects, their backs were against the wall. Maybe not as much K-State, but they had just lost to Missouri and they had been ranked, and they were feeling really crummy about themselves. Like they let that game kind of go. What was it? I forgot how long the field. It was like some crazy long field goal.
60,
yeah, it was something like that. So their backs were kind of against the wall, and they kind of felt like that was a must-win game. And then Baylor just kind of had a terrible start to the season. Fans are kind of getting on Dave Aranda, kind of, wondering if he's the answer. So this was a big pivotal game for them. Their backs were against the wall, and they, obviously took it to UCF in the fourth quarter. And so in some respects, now it's UCF's kind of in that position. Their backs are against the wall. They're at a pivotal moment where they gotta try to do something. So I'm very anxious to see how UCF responds. Like I said, it'll be a big turning point, I think, for UCF season, and whether they can get bowl eligible or better than everyone wants to go better than 6-6. Can they kind of make a run at this? If they can beat KU, I think they definitely have a shot. But if they lose, that's a tough locker room, because you're 0-3 and odds are you'd be 0-4 with OU in a couple weeks. So this is a big game. It's hard to predict. We don't know who's going to play quarterback for both schools. So I think that makes a big difference. If there's a healthy John Rice Plumlee and maybe Jalen Daniels doesn't play, you go one way. You honestly, you hope both of them are back in full speed on Saturday. So like everybody else, I'm very interested to see what happens this Saturday.
Yeah, it really is a coin flip to me right now. I'm a betting man, and I was going to place a wager on KU earlier and just kind of thought, kind of the things I've been saying, UCF's underrated. They're going to be really desperate on Saturday for a win. And if you win this game, you move to 4-2. And like you said, you get a bye, you get a whole week to prepare for OU. Malzahn drawing up crazy plays. And I really think it could go either way. And like you said, the 6-6 thing, you want to do better than that. KU's kind of facing that same thing where they went 6-6 last year, lost the bowl game. They want more. Haven't had a winning season since 2008. So yeah, it's a big game for both teams, both coming off losses and both have QB questions. I'm really interested to see how this game goes. Obviously, the first meeting between us two in the Big 12, and obviously there's going to be a ton more. I'm so appreciative that you came on, so easy to communicate with, and you've obviously been doing this for a long time, since 1999, pretty much when UCF had just started up there. So I'm really grateful that you came on, and hopefully we have more conversations down the road, and KU and UCF are 2 of the better schools in the league.
Yeah, I've had a lot of fun. Like I said, this has been a blast, kind of getting to know these Big 12 teams and fan bases. I've been on a lot of these shows and podcasts, so it's been a lot of fun for me. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for coming on. KU fans, show up to the booth on Saturday. It's going to be a great game, no matter who's at quarterback for both teams. 2 really good coaches, and I'm really appreciative, B. Thanks for coming on, and hopefully talk soon.